Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us for our second session of Women and Words. Thanks for coming back. This is truly special. You are spending time committing to your own growth and development as writers, and writers who are called to serve others with your message as published authors. Again, it is our privilege at Penguin Random House and my personal purpose, truly, to be able to serve you, demystifying this business for you, making it more accessible to you, and sharing the tips and insights that can help position you for success in working with the traditional publisher. Unlike our first session, tonight is fully conversational. We have 6 editors whose areas of expertise range from Christian children's picture books to adult romance and pretty much everything in between. So as a reminder, please use the Q&A feature to pose your questions to our panelists and use the chat to affirm what you're hearing. We noted this dynamic chat has also been a space for you all to network with each other. Please know we are planning to support your networking sensibilities as the program develops. We are making sure that you can remain connected in this community that we're building together. So please feel free to just absorb, celebrate the content, take notes, write out your notes, and consider what you're hearing, and know that we're mindful of creating opportunities for you to engage with each other and make the most of these new connections in the months ahead. So with that, I'd like to bring onto our virtual stage the Tamira Chapman, CEO of Storehouse in a Box, and the force in bringing us together. Hi, Tamira.
Hi, Portia. Thank you for that fantastic introduction. I want to welcome everybody back to our second session inside Editorial. I want to thank our extraordinary panelists in advance for the gems that you all will drop all night. I want to thank the PRH leadership team. We had a fantastic meeting in New York yesterday talking about the evolution of this program and the fantastic things that await us. So we encourage you all to stick with us on a journey. We have some extraordinary things in store for you, and we bet that we'll knock your socks off. I also want to thank everyone for completing the author roll call. So we noticed in our last session that we had a lot of engagement in the chat regarding authors already. That was actually a surprise to us. We had over 400 people respond to the author roll call, which means that over 400 of you have already published books, which is just fantastic. So we have compiled all of that information. It will be made available to you all in a directory and a lot more things planned for that information and ways that we'll network, as Portia said. I also want to thank you all for completing all of the reviews after session 1. By now, everyone should have received a copy of the video from session 1. If you all don't know where to find it, you could just go to our website at womenandwords.com and look at past sessions, and you'll find the content there. The exact same thing applies for this session too. We also had some questions a couple weeks ago about merchandise. The merchandise has arrived and it will be shipping by the end of this month. I think if you all just look behind Portia, you could see some of the merch already available in her office. So we'll get all of that shipped to you all this month as well. Also, if you all have not completed, if you all have not followed us on social, do so at Women in Words 2023. We have fantastic content that'll be shared there. We'll be marketing your books through that platform. We'll also be doing special guest appearances and all sort of other cool things. It looks like I can see down in the chat that some people are requesting the author roll call form now. That's also still available on our website, so you all can just click through to complete that. And then finally, I know that some of you all may still be having issues receiving our emails. We just want to encourage you to check your spam and your junk filters, because 9 times out of 10, the information that you all want is already there, but just sitting in that other folder. So with that, I am done. Thank you all in advance for your energy. Let's get started.
And thank you for your energy, Tamira. And truly, thank you. And shout out to all the Portias in the chat. It is wonderful to be in your presence. So I am going to take some time to read our panelists' bios today, because I think that knowing exactly who's before you and hearing the authors that they have worked with is important. So I'm going to start. with Bumi Ishola. Bumi's primary focus is on children's books, and she also contributes to the Ink and Willow gift product line. Authors she's worked with include Darina Williamson, Zochi Dixon, Esau Macaulay, Lucretia Berry, and Darina Lazo Gilmore Young. Bumi's interested in fiction and nonfiction picture books, as well as middle grade and young adult novels, specifically stories that authentically explore faith in action, have strong characters, and come from marginalized voices. Bumi is a member of People of Color in Publishing and Entrusted Women, and serves on the board for The Word, a storytelling sanctuary, which is a nonprofit working to build a publishing community that fights for diversity. Prior to working in publishing, Bumi worked in newspapers and magazines and as a middle school social studies and English teacher. Bumi, thank you so much for being here tonight. Next up is Chelsea Lorraine Johns, an editor, writer, and content strategist possessing over a decade of editorial experience. She's worked with leading brands such as Simon & Schuster, Moguldom Media Group, Black Girl in Alm, Serendipity Literary Agency, and many more. Chelsea believes in the power of language to create, shift, and uplift culture, and helps authors and brands clarify their message, write riveting narratives, and build their audiences through content and storytelling. Chelsea's worked with award-winning New York Times bestselling authors, including Dee Watkins, Blair Underwood, Alice Walker, Ambassador Susan Rice, Ntozake Shange, national bestseller Cleo Wade, National Book Award long-listed Nafisa Thompson Spires, award winner Nicholas Griffin, and many others throughout her publishing journey. Since her time joining the Ballantine team here at Penguin Random House, Chelsea has shepherded books like Clavis Natera's Neruda on the Park, Sarah Cypher's The Skin and Its Girl, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford's Sisterhood Heals, and Rachel Cargill's A Renaissance of Our Own. Chelsea, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Next is Derek Reed, editorial director at Convergent Books. Derek joined Penguin Random House in 2011 and has since edited a wide range of New York Times bestsellers, including Austin Channing Brown's I'm Still Here, Jedediah Jenkins' To Shake the Sleeping Self, Cole Arthur Riley's This Here Flesh, Richard Rohr's The Universal Christ, George W. Bush's Out of Many One and Portraits of Courage, Scott Harrison's Thirst, Shaka Senghor's Righting My Wrongs, and Kevin and Melissa Frederick's Marriage Be Hard. Acquiring the categories of religion, politics, memoir, pop culture, sports, leadership, and psychology, Derek does it all. Derek looks for authors with distinct voices, unforgettable stories, and unique ways of addressing how we live and seek meaning in a complex world. Thank you for joining us, Derek.
Good to be here, Portia.
Emmy Akonda is an executive editor acquiring nonfiction and select fiction projects at Tiny Reparations Books, Dutton, and Plume at Penguin Random House. Emmy previously worked at Seal Press at Hachette, Spiegel and Grau at Random House, and Henry Holt at Macmillan. Emmy publishes a diverse list of award-winning, best-selling, and culturally relevant books. Over the years, she has edited #1 New York Times and internationally best-selling authors, and edited winners or finalists for the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, Carnegie Medal, Financial Times Book of the Year, and the IME 100. Recent highlights on Emmy's list include #1 New York Times bestselling author Ijeoma Oluwo's Mediocre, Carla Cornejo Villavicencio's NBA finalist, The Undocumented Americans, Carla Powers' Pulitzer finalist, Home, Land, Security, Minda Hartz's Right Within, Ariana Davis's What Would Frida Do? International bestselling novelist Michael David Lucas's The Last Watchman of Old Cairo, Sanai Lemoyne's New York Times Editor's Choice, The Margot Affair, NASA astronaut Nicole Stott's Back to Earth, and former Reddit CEO Ellen Powell's Reset. Emmy, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks so much, Portia. I'm happy to be here.
Next up is Essie Soga, Hi, Essie. Essie joined Berkeley as an executive editor in 2022 here at Penguin Random House, acquiring women's fiction and romance. Her upcoming books include those by Etta Easton, Maya Ariel, and Elise Bryant. Essie's lifelong love of romance novels led to a career that began at William Morrow and Avon Books before she moved to Kensington Publishing, where she worked on a variety of fiction and nonfiction for that list. Essie, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
So good to see you. Hi, Portia.
Next is, not last but not least, I should say, Associate Editor Sydney Monday, who joined Kokila, part of our Penguin Young Readers group here at PRH, in May of 2018. Sydney's growing list features children's lit debuts from Kia Brown, Kiara Wright Ruiz, Brittany Perkins, and more. Prior to Kokila, Sydney worked at NPR, at the Penn Faulkner Foundation, and Sankofa Bookstore in Washington, D.C. Sydney is a graduate of Howard University and here with us tonight. Thank you, Sydney.
Hey, Portia, thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. We are going to get right into it because I have so many questions for you, and I'm sure that our attendees tonight do as well. So my number one thing that I'd like to start with is this. Something I often say to writers who are seeking publication is this, that writing is something we do for ourselves. It's how we make sense of the world around us. It's how we process our thoughts and emotions. But to publish is an act of service. I think that's rooted in the belief that sharing our writing can actually contribute value to others. So to get us started, can you each talk about how you know when a manuscript, something that someone has written, is ready to be a book, ready to be shared with the world? When are you ready to help them transmit that book? Happy to start with Derek.
Oh, man, this is a good question because I feel like often we're thinking about what makes us sign up a book and kind of catch that vision initially. But thinking about it from the standpoint of when do we let it go and put it in production is really compelling to me. And I think in that last round of edit, what I'm trying to do is sort of stand in the shoes of the person who's picking that book up in the bookstore, and they're somewhat interested and motivated to read it, but maybe also a little distracted and liable to put it down if a stretch of the book is too confusing or they can't picture a story. And I'm just trying to see, where are the places where I find my attention flagging and where are the places that I find tough to get through, and then just really workshopping those last remaining kinks. And it's tough to do that at that stage because you've been over the book, at least 4 or 5 times, probably more than that if you're the author. And you're still having to summon this creativity for stretches of the book that you've been over, more times than you can count. But that's usually what we find ourselves doing at that stage of the book.
I just want to go next because I thought that was interesting, Derek, because I do the same thing, but that's often my first round of edits is I sort of think of myself as like the author's first reader and like, where do I have questions? And that's sort of how I guide my edit letter. And then, yeah, I think that when I get to the place where I'm starting to feel maybe like a little panicky about the book, or like, have I missed something or something still not working here? That actually is sometimes where I'm like, maybe we need a fresh set of eyes. Maybe this is when it goes to copy editing because we have both worked this as well as we can. And like, maybe we're too close that we just can't see how to fix it anymore. And that I think is the signal to me to be like, okay, let's move this along. Assuming it's not anything gigantic that's wrong.
I can hop in. I'm often similar to Derek in that part of that last read is trying to do a final kind of market readership read and trying to see, have we missed anything? By the time I'm in my last edit, it's normally micro things. Is the setting alive enough? Does the dialogue flow like we wanted it to? Have we solved for all the issues in the manuscript early on? And then another thing I think about, and I often say in my author meetings, is that we have outstanding publicity and marketing teams. However, a book has to be able to stand on its own. Like if we don't get the media we thought we were going to get, if the marketing doesn't move the numbers the way we thought? Is there enough here for it to move by word of mouth? And sometimes you know, and sometimes you don't. And I think sometimes you get a good feeling of someone's going to read this and tell their friend about it. And if I can land there, then like I feel pretty good. And that's kind of my call on like, will this work if the campaign is slow? Will this still take wind? And that's something I think about often.
I love that, Chelsea.
I love everything that you said, Chelsea. I was also, Portia, when you asked the question, I actually heard it in two parts as far as like, when do we even know like it's ready to acquire as well? And I think for me, as you said earlier, like, you know, writing is kind of this personal thing and publishing is an act of service. And so even when I'm even looking at a project side, do I want to take it on? A part of me is asking like, has the author, and it, I mean, you want the story to still feel personal, but they also shifted it to where it feels universal, right? Where the messaging and just no matter who I am, if I was to come to this, does it speak to me, even if I've never walked exactly in the author's shoes? I think sometimes authors get very bogged down into like, well, this is what happened in my life, and this is my specific story, and they want that to be part of the story. And sometimes sometimes it makes perfect sense if you're like writing a memoir, but like I work on children's books, right? And kids come from all different backgrounds, all different ranges, but ideally you want this book to, for any kids to maybe sit into it and either see a piece of themselves or even help them open their eyes to a larger, you know, part of the world. And so, you know, trying to think like how is the story too entrenched in the personal that it actually loses the universal quality it could have is something I think about. And then I think on the like transmittal side, I mean, if I'm looking at a picture book, they're short, so I can read through them. I can read through it multiple times, right, in one sitting. And sometimes I'm asking myself, like, am I still smiling or feeling moved and touched with every single word and every single sentence? Like every word really does matter in a picture book. You don't have that many words. So if there's a point where I still pause and find myself thinking, I don't like that, or I'm just a little bit like, I didn't want to read it a second time, that's for me to go back. Like I need to feel like I can read this book over and over and over again, and it still brings me joy, because that's what I want a kid to feel. I want this to be the book ideally that they're going to their parents and saying, read again, read again, read again, because you know kids, they're crazy. They want to read the same thing a million times, but they only do it if they love it. And so I want them to feel that way. So if I don't feel that way, then I definitely cannot expect them to feel that way. And so that's something that I definitely think about. And I even think that with my middle grades and some of the other one, because even from teaching middle school, they also will be obsessed with the same books and read them over and over again. So can I get through this story and still smile, still feel all the same deep emotions, the same level, like where I want to feel it? Then that's when it feels like, okay, I'm ready to like let this go further into the world.
I can dive in next. Yeah, I also heard the two sides of your question, Portia, but I'll try to be brief. I think on the acquisition side, I get really excited when it's a subject that feels like is burning to be published that hasn't been published. Like that's when I get the most excited, is when it's like, how have we not talked about this? How have we not had a book about this? How is this not the big conversation in the national conversation? Like that's when I get particularly excited, and then it's very easy for me to get the rest of the team excited from there, because I just get swept up in that feeling where a lot of my authors will say like, this is the book that I just wish existed, because there hasn't been a book like this that represented me or my community, and they feel like they can really represent their community well. And as far as acts of service, I feel like I'm in service of the author and their vision. So in the editing process, a lot of it is service of their vision. So I'll have like the big structural edit, like does the structure serve the message, and then down to the line edit. And at that point, the part I get nerdy about is the language, because a lot of my nonfiction books are talking about, marginalized communities, and like, how can we shape that conversation and be really sensitive about how the language is shifting around these communities, and making sure that we're not just copying, but also contributing, even on the terms of like just the language. And then at that point, I really feel like as long as the vision still seems clear for me and the author, and that we feel like we're communicating that well, then it's ready to send to copy editing. So that's my take.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about how publishing is an act of service, I think point of view is always so vital to making books that readers need to read. And, I grew up with a family who was always saying, everyone has a story. And so I think in honor of that vision, that authenticity, a book is really ready when to go to print when the literary device is used. Things like voice, language, dialogue, setting are all integrated and well enough to really serve the heart of the story. You know, that the thesis and the intention are clear while still being an engaging narrative that your reader can connect to and go back to again.
Oh, so brilliant. Thank you. I have this question for later, but it seems appropriate now because a number of you have talked about audience and your role as an editor thinking about the audience for the work on the author's behalf. So can you, and this isn't to put you on the spot, but can you talk about when you expect your authors to be thinking about audience? Like how much of that is your author's responsibility and at what stage? And I recognize that because some of you work on nonfiction, that's going to be different than those of you who are working on fiction. And so actually, because I think it's going to be harder to address that for the novelist crowd, Chelsea, Essie, can you talk to me about that? When do you start thinking about audience and whose job do you think that is?
Sure, I can start. I'm certainly thinking about that acquisition. You know, I'm looking at the book and saying, and our team is asking, who is it for? Who's the reader? And so for sure on the nonfiction side, I'm thinking through what has worked right now. Not that that is a telltale of if this will work or not, but it helps inform our conversation for sure. And so I'm thinking about audience as soon as I'm about to acquire a book. I mean, you want an editor that has a vision for the project, and that vision has to entail who's the reader and how are we bringing it to market. And so that's a part of my job, certainly. I think at the acquisition level, I expect for the author and the agent to have an idea about who their contemporaries are and where they want to publish into. Do they need to know the market the way we should know it? No, but they should have an idea of, hey, like Memphis and Deshaw, like these people feel like they fall into the category of where I want to publish into. Or on the nonfiction side, these are my contemporaries. I don't like for an author to be thinking about the market and comps. I just want them to be doing the work because sometimes that then informs the work in a way they didn't need to. So at the start, for sure, in the process of writing and revising, just like leave it alone and let us worry about it until we like need to bring it back up.
Yeah, for me, I would say actually a lot is on the author. A lot of the fiction I work on, not all of it, but a lot of it is genre fiction. And so that comes with baked in audience expectations. And while I am generally drawn to work that sort of plays with the genre boxes, I'm really faithful to those expectations. So, you know, there's a mystery, there's a crime, and somebody's got to solve it. There's a romance, some amount of people have to be in love by the end. And other than that, you can kind of do whatever you want. And so I think sometimes authors in genre fiction, in an effort to do something new and different, might try to subvert that expectation. And that is always going to go wrong. Like the audience for genre fiction is sort of paramount, and keeping the inherent promise that they've been given by picking up what they've been told is a romance or a thriller or a mystery is really, really key in everything we do. And everything around those edges can change, but if you break that promise to them, it doesn't matter how many more books you write or how faithfully you stick to it after that, you sort of can't ever get that audience back.
Thank you, Chelsea and Essie, and Chelsea for making it clear that our team is asking what the audience is at that point of acquisition. I think those of you who acquire and edit nonfiction, how do you handle this? When do you have to start thinking about audience, and how much are your authors and their agents, also thank you for highlighting that, how much do you depend on them to inform your audience insights?
I can go first. So Tiny Reparations Books is Phoebe Robinson's imprint. It's 2 years old and it's focused on marginalized voices. So writers of color, queer authors, disabled authors, other marginalized authors. And I mean, our audience is everyone, but I think book to book, it's usually very clear from the proposal stage and for nonfiction, like who the audience, the author is trying to reach. So usually the author and the agent have already discussed that and figured that out, and that actually shaped a lot of the proposals. As in nonfiction, it will affect how the book is written and how it's shaped depending on the audience. And so for me, oftentimes the question I'm asking authors is like, is this intended for your community? Is it meant to bridge communities? Is it meant to educate a dominant gaze? And those are all legitimate ways to go about things, but I think it's good to have a conversation with the author. And I think sometimes there's still a process in our industry where writers might be timid and feel like, oh, I have to flatten myself out to appeal to everybody and every audience, be understood widely from people way outside my community. And that might not be what your book is meant to be. It might be bad advice that you got. So sometimes like the conversation with them is about giving them permission to like speak directly to their community in ways that they haven't been able to, in ways that the publishing industry hasn't really been open to. And comps is part of that problem. I'm sure we'll talk more about comps in the future, but yeah, comparative titles is comps, and it's kind of a language used within the industry, but there are issues with it, especially when it comes to diversity. I'm sure we'll talk about that more. Comps can be a shorthand for audience, but it's not super useful for authors to think too much about that, especially when they're writing. But yeah, it is something that we think about, and it does affect how the book is edited. So it's best for me to have a conversation early in like the very first, when an author is talking to different publishers, that they have a clear sense of who they want their audience to be and how to write the book to that audience. We can figure out how to market it. Like that's the publishing team's job, but it does dramatically affect how you write the book, in my opinion. So it's good to have that conversation and be on board right at the start.
Derek, anything?
That covers it really well. I would just say, I think when I think about my particular authors who navigate this question, I think sometimes different authors thrive differently on whether they think about the audience. I know some authors who really like to picture, if this book is kind of a table that different readers are seated around, who are the different readers I want to make eye contact with at different points in the manuscript. And then I have other authors who are just, I want to write what I'm interested in, and then we can think about audience later. So I try to have a little bit of flexibility about that. But what I do like authors to have is a sense of, no book, especially a nonfiction book, is published into a complete vacuum. There are other books that readers have read about the topic, other writers probably working in that space. So I tend to think that it's a strength to know what are the other books that have been published in your space, and what have they said, what haven't they said, what's kind of that burning question that you have that you want to be addressed on your topic. And I think if you can write from that place, it kind of frees you up to not feel like you have to address everything that's ever been addressed on your topic, and write the book that's most unique to you and to what you feel like hasn't been said.
Thank you so much, Derek. I love that. Who are the readers you want to make eye contact with when this book is out there? That's golden. Thank you. Question about the role of agents, and I also appreciate that you're saying the job of the writer, focus on writing, worry about the business of this when you are ready to worry about the business of this, and you will have help in thinking about the business of this. What role do you think the agents play, and what is the role of the author in trying to convince the agent to take them on?
I don't know. so I'm not an agent, obviously, so I don't know how to convince, like what you would say exactly to convince them. But I think the same way that you'd want to capture my attention as an editor, that's ideally you've captured their attention as an agent, right? You have good writing, you have a clear sense of what you're writing about, who you want to speak to, all the things that we've all been talking about. I think even an agent is looking for those things up front. And then they I think their role is to help the author sort of shape it into a package that then is easy for us to ultimately take a look at and say very quickly, okay, yes, let's move forward and let's continue the conversation. I think agents are also helpful. I mean, they're kind of the manager of the author's career, I guess. And so they're really helpful as far as helping them figure out the contract details and how many books do they want to work on in the course of the next X amount of years or whatever. My job is to really just edit and help you get your, your book from, drafts to final copy. And there's definitely a lot of business questions that is just not part of my job description. So I'm not going to be able to answer them as your editor. I'm not going to be able to spend my time and energy helping you navigate that, but that's what your agent's job is for. So, I mean, there's definitely tons of authors who don't have agents and who publish unagented, but it can be helpful, especially when you're thinking about publishing either a large quantity of writing over the course of your life, right? Or if you are also working with big publishers who, at the end of the day, we're businesses. So we have our, business goals and agendas. And while I don't think that any of us as individuals or even our company is looking to, screw anybody over, at the same time, like you want someone who ultimately is your advocate on your side too, to answer any questions if you have any concerns about business practices. And that's just something that we would not be able to do as editors. It's not within our role. It's not within our job scope. And so I just think an agent can be really helpful in that, just navigating the business side of what it means to be an author and to be a writer.
I'll say too, like on the role of the agent, which completely agree with everything you said. I started in agenting. I was a baby agent reading like 1,000 email slush piles of submissions. And I think that you almost want to feel as though the author has really been intentional about their outreach to agents, that you didn't do a blind sweep of like, I'm just going to send this query out to everyone and see who bites. That you've gone like, oh, this agent has worked on these 7 books in the genre I want to publish into, or the people I think are publishing in the space I want to publish in. And so you focus that list. I used to tell authors or friends, even who are trying to get into publishing, to maybe make a list of 15 to start with some of the younger agents or mid-list agents. Try to get some feedback. Sometimes it's just hard to get feedback. Younger agents are a little hungrier. And so even if it's a pass at that stage, it's typically a pass with maybe a line or two of what was working or what wasn't. You go for the big wigs. You either may not hear back for some time. You will hear back, hopefully, but may not hear back for some time, or it will be just a standard pass. So I think sometimes just starting to get feedback from agents. I saw in the chat, it was like, how do you get an agent? It's normally querying them with whatever they have on their website, what they request. Nonfiction is normally proposal and sample chapters, and probably 3 or 4 chapters for a novel as well. But I think you're really, like, if you're intentional, it looks like I've read other work, you've represented it, and I know like you're into what I'm writing, then it feels like, okay, like they're making a connection. And the agent's role, exactly what Booney said.
Kelsey, thank you. That was very comprehensive and leads me to another question. Now that we've and thank you for the advice about getting an agent and starting with the list of 15. That's broader than the list I've said. And also the wisdom of start with the younger agents, because you are more likely to get a certain kind of feedback that would be useful for you. That's golden. And for folks out there, our November 15th session will include literary agents who will be able to speak to this with you directly. You touch on something, Chelsea, I didn't realize, and that is about the role of the book proposal. So can we take a second there? Because of course, that is a document that I say sits between art and commerce, right? It is a document communicating to people who are in this business how to sell your precious piece of art. And I've always known it as nonfiction projects are the ones that require proposals. Is that still the right math? For children's projects, for fiction, for poetry? There are a number of poets here. can you talk to me about what a proposal is comprised of, whether it's even necessary?
I could talk about nonfiction proposals. I imagine for fiction, you usually want a full manuscript, but I'll let the fiction folks talk about that. Nonfiction, yeah, you do need a book proposal. They are typically, I would say, like 50 pages in length, although sometimes it can go as long as 100, depending on how much sample material is included. It usually includes like an overview, which might be like a page or more of just like the big picture vision of the book. And then sample chapters, maybe 1 or 2, that kind of helps vary a lot the length of the whole overall proposal. And then a lot of kind of, marketing tools, so like a bio about the author and like networks that you have, speaking events that you've done, social media, stats that you want to share, supporters that you have that you could rely on for blurbs or for helping spread the word for the book. Just kind of everything that you can to support, that you already have kind of like a built-in network of some sort. That's like traditional, we'll talk about platform, I'm sure, later, but like traditionally, a lot of nonfiction people do really care about platforms, so like the audience that you already have. But because of the work that I do and the kind of authors that I tend to work with, I tend to take that with a grain of salt, just because a lot of marginalized folks don't have access to traditional platforms. They may not be able to be on staff at the New York Times or an anchor on the NBC, or they might not already have like a big speaking gig, or they might not have a lot of the traditional things that a lot of other nonfiction writers have. And I think about that a lot, and so I don't require that personally in the books that I acquire. The thing I really look for in proposals is like voice, having a very clear vision. So the overview has to show like voice and vision, and I really have to be wowed by like the sample chapters. They have to be like really impressive and make me want to drop everything else like my sub file. Like that's where you want to be show stopping. But it is a kind of a blend between like art and commerce, but it is, I would say, mostly a selling tool. So you still need to be able to showcase why this was going to stand out above the crowd. I don't know. That's a general gloss. I hope that's helpful. But if anyone wants to add, and I'm really curious about if things vary a lot for children's and because there's nonfiction children as well, and then for fiction.
Yeah, so I kind of did a sort of thing, because in the general market, proposals are not a thing for children's books, but in the Christian market, it is totally a thing. And I don't know if it's because most of the Christian market started out mostly with nonfiction type of things, and so it's just a habit that they've all carried over. I really don't know. But when I joined, my current imprint, I found out that like we got proposals. Like, oh, okay, I have to get proposals, and they are not the 50 to 100 page. When you said that, I was like, ooh, that's a lot to read. Like I was feeling a bit stressed for you. But I would say our proposals are anywhere from a one-pager that kind of gives me a like clear sense of who the author is, any details about their background, whether it's platform or just why are they the right voice and why would they speak to the market that we're trying to reach. Because I work for a Christian publisher, our authors, we are looking for authors who identify as Christian or who are specifically writing a message that is speaking to the Christian audience. And so something in the proposal that communicates why us versus why anybody else in the in the publishing world is important. It's one of those things where I don't need a lot of information, but I need enough information to convey to my team, like, this is why this would be a good fit for us. And so there are times I really do just get a one-pager along with the manuscript. Other times it's 2 to 3 pages, or sometimes there's a few agents who give me a whole lot more. And I'm like, I didn't need to read all of this, but it's, and what's interesting also, because I actually started out my publishing career in the general market, is a lot of the things that I look for in a proposal now are things that I had to actually look for anyway before I could acquire a book on my own. It's just that I was as an editorial assistant doing the research for my boss and trying to dig up this information, that information, and going back to the agent to ask a follow-up question. So it is nice to get a proposal that already answers many of the questions that I need to find the answers for, that I kind of am glad that it's part of our process personally. But I also know it caused a lot of stress for a lot of authors who are either not familiar with the Christian space or do not have an agent who's familiar with the Christian space. And I always assure them I'm not looking for what you get in nonfiction. It really is just enough for me to understand why me, why are you pitching this to us? And where do you see this fitting in this larger space, and why you think that your book would, I think for kids' books, something going back to audience actually is you have the child who you're actually writing to, but you have the parent who has to buy the book, right? So you kind of have two audiences that you're sort of weighing. At least as an editor, I'm weighing those two audiences. And I know our marketing team is weighing those two audiences, and so is sales. And because kids don't have their own money to really spend books until they are teens, and oftentimes even then their parents might still have a lot of say about what they can spend their money on and what type of books they can buy. And so a lot of times I'm asking myself, like, does this meet a felt need that so whether it's right now, for instance, like mental health and anxiety is like super big for it's just in the news everywhere, and every single kid is talking about it, in every school and everything else. Even when I taught, having that stress about, are the kids all right? And so, looking for, does the author really understand that there's a felt need here that they're meeting? And that's what I'm looking for, even in the proposals, that clear communication of, I have a very clear vision, but I also understand the felt need that this book would fill in this space.
Yeah, I've bought books on proposal before as a children's book editor. Usually it's nonfiction proposals, and everything that Umi said, your audience, what your comps are. Usually the proposals that I'll buy will also have a sample of the writing, so you can get a sense of the author's writing style as well. So I think combined with the sample and kind of like the vision, the goal of the work, those are usually enough to get you there for nonfiction. I will also say that sometimes we see proposal for like longer illustrated works like graphic novels.
Thank you, Sydney. You touched on something I'd really like to make sure we explore, which is whether proposals are necessary for certain formats. So one being novels, that was new information, and two, memoir, which is that kind of hybrid, right? The math I understood was fiction, you just needed to write the whole manuscript. If you have a query that, or a cover letter to that, that's sufficient, that can articulate why you are the perfect author for this book or where this sits in the marketplace. But that one pager of info plus the novel is the whole thing that you need if you're working on fiction. Memoir, some folks have said they treat it like fiction, where because it is a full narrative of a life or lived experience, they need to see the complete thing, whether that's a 40,000 word memoir manuscript that feels a little shorter and essayistic, like Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, or a 75,000 word memoir. It's a little more expansive. I'm thinking more like Andre Agassi's memoirs, probably they were maybe closer to 85,000 words. But a memoir is also a work of nonfiction, and there's a high percentage chance that if you were popular enough to warrant having a memoir out there, let's say it was your platform that gave it to you, you need some time off from whatever it is that made you famous to be able to write this, which is facilitated by a book advance. So therefore, we would not require a memoirist to have the full thing prepared. We require them to have a proposal with, again, some strong sample material to let us know how you're diving into it. What do you say, professionals? And also poetry, because I've actually never seen a poetry proposal myself.
Yeah, I'll say for a memoir, my preference is probably the full manuscript. It is, while it's nonfiction, it is a full narrative arc. You want to be able to rally and cheerlead on behalf of this project. And sometimes I need to be able to see the full vision of the project to be able to do so. I think it's also, semi-okay if there is a substantial amount of sample material, more than what you would normally submit for a regular nonfiction project. So maybe it is a third of it, and we have a really detailed chapter outline and synopsis. So we're getting a full narrative arc. We understand where the book is going. And even if I had, if we're an agent is submitting a full manuscript for a memoir, there are still very key parts of the proposal that Emmy mentioned, the audience, the overview, who the market is. Like, we still need all those things too for a memoir. I feel like I'm missing something else I was trying to say, but that's the gist. For poetry, I've often received full manuscripts for poetry as well. Maybe a 4 to 5 pager of this is who the author is, why it's needed now, who the market is, and then it is a full manuscript for a proposal for a poetry book.
I just wanted to say, you're right, Portia, for novels, just writing the book. I will say I am seeing more like partial manuscripts, particularly in commercial fiction, which it has the benefit as the editor that if you're like, oh, this is a great idea and I want to help shape where it goes, they haven't written all 80,000 words. So, you're not telling somebody throw away 2/3 of your book, but it is a risk, particularly if you're a debut, because some people can't finish books. And so that would be the risk you would take on if you bought a partial. So it's not really a proposal. It's much more like a big chunk of the book, a detailed synopsis and the cover letter. But I have seen that more and more in the last couple of years, when I never saw it before. And we never would have been allowed to buy a partial fiction manuscript before.
Yeah, and kids, I would say, if it's not, I need a full manuscript, besides if it's like a graphic novel or a nonfiction project that, because obviously the graphic novel needs art, but even then I would want to see a pretty complete script, maybe at least, even if it's not like fully drawn out, or just a very detailed synopsis. I think as we were saying, with fiction, I want to know that you can land the plane just as well as you can take off. So it's nice to be able to see the full arc of where you're going, and for me to be able to really know that you just didn't spend the last 3 months getting your first 5 chapters perfect, and then the rest of it's just not going to come to me. And so, but also like with picture books, they're short. Give me the full manuscripts. Like, why are you holding back? And so with some kids' books, it's like, it's short enough. Just share the whole thing. Let me read the whole thing, and then I can make an actual decision here, one way or the other. But
thank you, Bumi. There is a question that's asking, for children's books, is a manuscript enough? And then the editor or agent will help locate an illustrator. For picture books, so Bumi and Sydney, for kids' picture books, having the storyboard, so the text of the book is a part of the proposal, having that full thing out there. What is the responsibility for illustrations?
So I would say, are you asking if we're able to buy just like the script without it being paired with an illustrator? I've seen that before. I think it's usually a quicker sell if the person who is writing the graphic novel is also illustrating. But on our imprint, we do have books that have been bought that were already packaged. So it's like the author and the illustrator came together into the deal.
And then are they also asking about like picture books and like chapter books, whether or not an illustrator comes there? Sydney, I don't know if you disagree, but I know my preference is an illustrator not to be on board. It's one of my favorite parts of the job to look for an illustrator and to get to help pick the illustrator, and it's also part of the editing vision, actually, is to, when I look at the words, like, am I able to actually see art come to life already as I'm reading it? And, is there a certain style, a certain, emotion, all those things that we're trying to evoke to the audience we're trying to reach. And so I think sometimes, authors love a style, but maybe it's not really kid friendly, or it's not really even it's not humorous enough for what your writing is, or any of those things, right? Or it's too humorous for how serious this book is. And I think, artists are word people. And so they don't necessarily know art. And so it's like nice for it to come with the manuscripts, and then we can discuss like the art together and build that process together. I actually just heard Amanda Gorman and Christian Robertson speak, because they just came out with their picture book, and they had asked her how involved she was. And she was like, he wasn't in the room when I was writing, so why should I be in the room when he was illustrating? And I was like, I loved it. I was like, yes. But like this idea of like, it's so much fun to let the illustrator come and collaborate fully on their own. And so it's nice for you to just send your words and then let us kind of like take it and bring it like that full collaboration in order to create a beautiful project that, just sings.
Yeah, I will say most of the picture books that I receive come with without artists attached. And I think it's a good thing to keep in mind that just like there are editors that are on staff at publishing houses, there are art directors who are basically the editors for artists, who work with editors to pair an illustrator for a manuscript and also give feedback to an artist about kind of tweaks to their art to really make sure it's illustrating the story with all those details that we were saying. I think it could actually potentially make it harder to sell your project because it's just like another element that an editor might not like according to their own taste or vision.
Beautifully put, Sydney. Thank you. That did give me another question, but I'll save it for the end. I'm curious about this. Oh, that's what it is. Illustrators. What if you are an illustrator and you want to have your work traditionally published, but you're not a writer, so you don't necessarily have the poem for this? Is that just the art director's problem, or
Yeah,
do you
I can't help you. Now, there have been times that I've heard about editors who have seen a piece of artwork and then that's inspired an idea that has like taken off into make into a picture book. There's I just forgot the name of the book. It has a unicorn. It's like a cute little black unicorn, if I remember correctly. But like that idea came about because the editor saw the image, was like, there's a story there, and then approached the illustrator and they developed a story together. That's not necessarily, though, usually how things work. I mean, if you are an illustrator, you can submit your portfolio to art directors so that they keep you in mind for projects. Ideally, you want to find an agent the same way you would for your text, and you find it, there's tons of agents that represent illustrators specifically. There's some actually agents who represent both. And so, you know, knowing that if your agent does represent both, then they can kind of help you both sell your art and sell your words, or you kind of have two separate ones, but it'll be their job to pitch you for projects. I mean, there's times that I definitely, like with my art director, look through tons of agency websites to pick out portfolios, but there's also times we just send out an email and let them know, hey, we're looking for an artist with this kind of style and et cetera. And so your agent would be the one to suggest you and say they're available for a job. And but yeah, if you just have a picture but no words, like my job is to edit words first and foremost, so that's kind of where I have to start with in general. But there are stories where it happens the opposite way. It's just not really normative. So
thank you for that, Bhumi. And actually, I did see someone mention, what about illustrated books? So coffee table books, photography-driven books, and that is a part of the publishing universe that I work in. And so that is a proposal business. That is, you're going to have your images, but please make sure that you have the rights to those photos, that you have the rights to have them republished and shared for money. And so it is your collection of photos, but you also, your narrative contribution is why these photos, why they all string together. And so a chapter outline part of the proposal is just as important. Whether you might need to be paired with a writer down the line, the same way that in children's picture books, you might need to be paired with an illustrator. Your publisher, your editor will love to help you determine that. Your agent might even as well. And Bhumi, thank you for highlighting that there are agents who rep illustrators exclusively. And when publishers are looking for those folks, agents will go straight there. Excuse me, editors will go straight to those agents. I hope that answered the question for folks. Question now is, so you have the proposal in, you love it. Chelsea, you were able to convince your bosses that yes, the audience for this is clear. You acquire it. What are you doing first? What is the first thing that you're doing with your authors to get started on the process of developing this manuscript together?
We're talking nonfiction, right? For our proposal, it sounds like. Okay. Either or. Honestly, the first thing I'm doing, and I didn't always do this earlier in my career. We normally talked about it in the author meeting of here are the things I think we need to grow in, and from what I've read, or here are things that I'm foreseeing could be an issue if I'm reading a nonfiction proposal that we need to keep our eyes out on. And so the first thing I've been doing in the last few years is just an editorial chat before I start the edit. I'm saying, hey, let's talk in depthly for about an hour or two, and this is my vision. If it's a novel, these are the pain points I'm seeing. What have been the pain points for you in the process of getting to this draft with your agent? Let's talk through what my vision is for the fixes, make sure we're aligned. I normally talk through some of that in my author meeting because you want to make sure you're signing with an editor who is not trying to take your book in the direction that you actually don't want it to go. So I do highlight that normally in my letter, during acquisitions, in our meetings, but that first, after I've signed it, and we have a deal, I'm hopping on a Zoom and we're talking through what I believe the direction of the book is, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. And after that, I'm off to edit. Yeah, but that's typically the first thing I'm doing.
Emmy, Essie?
Yeah, not bad. Yeah, I think there's like a meeting that happens before the book deal. So those are when you're going to different publishers, hopefully you have different publishers competing for you, and you'll meet with different editors, and you should have a conversation about vision. And if I have a big change I want to make, then I will definitely preview that in that prospective author meeting. But yes, after the book deal, the first thing I do, I want to arrange like a celebratory call that also, yes, again, talks about the vision for the book. And I like to talk to them about their process. So for nonfiction, the book hasn't been written, it's just a proposal. So I like to ask them what their writing process is. Do they like to go off into the writer's cave and draft the whole thing and then I'm not showing it to you until it's done? Or are they like, I'm very nervous, can I send you half a manuscript first, or can we batch it? Can we have feedback along the way? So I kind of want to talk to them about what their comfort level is, what their preferences are as a writer, and then we try to schedule out if it's in batches, what the dates are for that. So that's early. Those are the earliest conversations, I think. And it's usually more big picture structural ideas. We won't get into the line edit until much later in the process. So it's big picture edits for the first conversation.
Can we extrapolate that into the first full year? How many rounds? So I guess to slow this down, there used to be this old math, right? If we were to acquire a book today, it's October 4th, 2023. In the contract, we're going to say the manuscript is due on October 4th, 2024, and we will plan to publish this on October 4th or the closest Tuesday in 2025, giving us as developmental editors a full year to work directly with the author one-on-one to get it into that kind of shape that we all talked about at the beginning of our conversation. Is that math still good for all of you in this chat? And then how many rounds of edits are you going through with your authors? Forward to hearing the range of this.
I had to say I was blown away when I saw that in your notes, because I've never had that experience of having a year from acquisition to not ever. Maybe when I did nonfiction, yes, but I acquired a book in August that is a partial, and it's due to me November 15th. So yeah, I've never had quite that experience, but I will say probably from when I acquire to when it goes into production, to the copywriting stage, that's probably closer to a year. But yeah, I would say the sort of editorial process lives more in the 6-month range for me. And I don't love to do a ton of rounds. I try to cap it at 3, because I just feel like authors especially can get really precious after that. And I think particularly with commercial fiction and genre fiction, there's so much that's about the energy and the pacing. And I think sometimes when we start fiddling too much, you start to lose that. As I was saying, then you sort of like lose sight of it. And that's when I'm like, somebody else has to look at this. So yeah, for me, I try to stick with 3. It sort of depends on where we are. And I do have, you know, as Emmy was saying, and Chelsea, those sort of pre-acquisition conversations that are like, this is sort of big picture what I'm thinking. But yeah, there'll be meaty edit letters. There'll be a lot going on in those 3 rounds. But yeah, I do try to not go back and forth too much. But yeah, it's a pretty tight turnaround. I've done a week before, which I don't recommend.
I aspire to be you, Essie. I wish I could say to my authors, oh yeah, in 3 months, be done. And even with gift product, where I'm talking about a manuscript of maybe 500 to 1,000 words, I still need at least 9 months of back and forth. But Derek, you 3 rounds in 1 year?
I would say, yeah, I think generally at least 4 to 5 months for most edits, but then sometimes I'll be working with someone who's a public figure and there's something going on in their world that we have to have the book out in time for. I've also had a 1-week edit where we picked up a self-published memoir that there was a very big television interview already taped that we wanted to get the book out in time for. So that was about a 12 hours a day week, just getting it edited in time to put it in. Very much an exception. But I would say I try to budget at least 4 months for most books. And then a lot of books, it ends up taking more, 6 months to a year. And yeah, often it'll be 3 rounds, 1 kind of big picture, 1 more zeroed in on the sort of line by line, working on transitions, filling out details. And then the last one kind of working out the last remaining problem areas. But it can go more 4 to 5 rounds depending on the author and what the book needs. Every edit is kind of a different animal to me.
Yeah, I'm curious about what Sydney will say as well too. But I mean, so much what Essie said. From the time that I acquire it to the time it comes out, most children's books for me run on about, especially if they're a picture book and there's a lot of illustrations, about a 24-month timeline. And so from the time I acquire it, you won't see your book out in the world for 2 years. And so, the editing process though really does depend on the project. Picture books, like I said, are short. So I read over them many times. I've easily gone through 10 plus edits with an author. And part of that is, again, just tweaking every word and feeling like this is just still not right. This one little line, this one little section or whatever it is. And then when we start the illustration process, there's times that editing still happens because the illustrator comes back with some amazing illustration or some idea that we're like, this is awesome, but it doesn't really match the text. Do we want to play with the text? Do we want to go back to the illustrator? And there's still some tweaking that might happen then. And so that whole process does take about a year, from acquiring it to editing it to getting the art, all together. And then once we get final art, there's still all the copy editing and other stuff that has to happen before it goes off to press. And so it is a 24-month process usually for picture books. For my chapter books or my like 1-color books that are only just going to have black and white in them, we could go down to a 15 to 18 month, but it really does depend on our team, honestly, and what we are even capable of having on our plate at one time as well too. And with my middle grade, I think 3 rounds of edits has been about right too. And the first one is definitely big picture. The second one is I'm also kind of like going back through and being like, you still have not addressed these 5 things, or now you made this change that makes this not make sense anymore. And then the last time is really just line editing and kind of clean up and making sure the flow sounds really great. But I agree with Essie. There's a point where like the author has spent so much time on this, they're probably getting burnt out as well too, that I don't want to keep on burning them out by being like, let's nitpick at stuff, but I also don't want to. I'm reading it over every single time as well too. I want my excitement to stay up as high as well too. So, and I think that's going back to even just the acquisition is the reason. That's one of the reasons why I want a full manuscript sometimes, is so that I can really see what you already have and what I'm already working with, so that I'm making a true, honest decision that I know that we can get it there from point A to point B within the time frame that I'm envisioning, and not where it's like, oh, this needed a lot more work than I realized, and then that becomes just like a really hard edit and a slog for both of us, which I wouldn't like for me or you.
I want to jump in on that, and this is a little bit off topic, so we can come back after. But what you just said is something that I think like aspiring writers don't realize that can be a reason that we pass on your book. And it's not that your book isn't good or worth it, but we've looked at our schedules and our lists and our workload, and we're like, yes, this book could get there if I did this work on it, but I don't have the time and space to do that work on it. And so I think that that's something that like people don't necessarily really see, but that can definitely factor into why somebody might pass on your book, and you're thinking, oh, but this editor or this agent was the perfect person for it, but it might just come down to their workload at that moment when you queried just could not accommodate your project.
And in the chat, I'm seeing a lot of people are like, this is so surprising. I thought writing a children's picture book would take less time, right? And it makes sense, that line of thinking. But I just want to say, we receive your manuscript, and then from there, often we're having an illustrator start their process. So it's like they're kind of like doing their version of writing a book too, right? So we have to give them at least 9 months to even, I waited sometimes like 2 or 3 years to work with an illustrator that we really want for a particular project. And so they have to illustrate, and then because of production and shipping, we're shipping your book from China since it's illustrated. And so that they go and ship. So that takes 9 months as well. So that entire time isn't going to be spent on going back and forth with your editor on passes, hopefully.
Thank you for that, Sydney. Derek, I see this, and I'm going to nod this back to you because I think of self-help as just a part of the nonfiction space, because that's where we would categorize it. But I realize that it might not seem that way to folks in the crowd. How do you go about developing self-help projects? Do you think about them as just straight nonfiction with the same proposal needs, and then the same timeline for developing those, whether it's a devotional or a series of prayers?
Yeah. So I would definitely include that category within the process that I laid out. Like, I think you're probably going to get at least 3 rounds if it's a self-help book or inspirational nonfiction. And then, yeah, I think the proposal is pretty similar. You want that sort of overview that gives you the 1,200 word version of the book, or the version you would give if you stood up on a stage and talked about it. You want an outline, you want some sense of what you've been doing out there in the world to kind of spread this message and become an expert on, or a recognized expert on it, or build some kind of community that's listening for your words. I think there's a ton of different forms the platform could take for that kind of book. But yeah, and I think sample writing is really important too. I'll often skip to the sample chapters before I read the outline, just to see, like, do I connect the voice? Do I feel like they're picking up momentum within the chapters? And then I'll go back and see, okay, where does this book go from here? So yeah, I think self-help goes pretty similar to the way we've kind of described the proposal process, even though some of the elements might be a little different.
Thank you, Derek. And Bhumi, in the Ink and Willow space, I'm thinking about that interactive self-help model in terms of journals, when devotionals are then, prayer on one page, but your actual writing space on another, which might be my absolute favorite kind of book. What are you all evaluating there for acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely thinking about, again, how will this book be used actively? Because if it is an interactive book, we're really processing, is there enough content here where someone would want to sit down with it on whether it's a daily, weekly, or, whatever the timeline that you're envisioning, and they would actually answer these questions. They would actually want to engage. They'd want to doodle on the page, whatever it is that you're, thinking about. And I mean, we don't necessarily expect the author to have all those answers, but we do want them to have already come through thinking about why is this just not a normal trade book, right? And so they should have already come to the table with, here's the areas, the elements that I think would be interactive. I want to have these questions. I imagine people getting a chance to write or draw or create their own prayers from my prompt, or, you know, whatever it is. And then that helps us kind of really process, like, okay, yeah, let's move forward. There's other times that it's just, the idea is highly illustrative, because of the way that it's, you know, the concept just requires visuals. There's no way to tell this product, like create this product without some visual. And then that's something else that would work really well in the gift space, because it's not just about the words. It is that the power of the visual as well too. Just those married together is what really just like makes this project shine. And if that's something the author can communicate, then that's great. I will say with Ink and Willow, we actually come up with a lot of ideas even in-house based off of even trade projects. So if Derek was to acquire a book and we love the idea of it and we see an interactive, you know, component, there are times that we've brainstormed in-house an idea and then gone to the editor to be like, hey, do you think your author would be down for this? And we're able to kind of move forward with the project in that context. So, you know, there are times that, even if you don't have the idea, being even open to this, to what can be done with your work could lead to other opportunities with it. And I think that's probably true for almost any genre to some degree, or at least again in the gift and in the kids space, where you might have written a picture book, but there might be an opportunity for a board book. I don't know, like being open with what you've created can be really helpful in, you know, because we might see new opportunities that you have not realized. And I think it's really nice to not always be so strongly married to one idea, because there might be just an opportunity that you have never envisioned that could come your way. And that's part of what, even what I like to do as an editor, is help, you know, authors really dream bigger sometimes than even what they've came to the table with initially. So yeah.
I love that, Boomi. And of course, because of the way you said it, I am very much thinking about Derek's authors that I would love to have on your list, like maybe Cole Arthur Riley, maybe Richard Rohr. But you heard me say that before.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't stop myself. We are getting a lot of questions, and thank you, Elizabeth and Suzette. Elizabeth Stivey and Suzette Brooks are monitoring our chat. There's a huge number of questions that are coming to us regarding AI and how it's impacting our market, what authors here can do to protect their work, and also thinking about copywriting. I think some of the reasons that, you know, traditionally we as a publisher shied away from publishing works directly from writers was around protection, right? We wanted authors to know that their ideas were safe, and there wasn't any skepticism of, you know, oh, an editor read my book, but they didn't acquire my book. And I see, you know, Dean Koontz came out with a book just like mine in order to absolve us of similar things. We just don't read unagented submissions. That has changed over time. Also, old math used to be you had to physically mail a manuscript and that would establish a copyright. Folks know that we will have all of the legal professionals here to answer these kinds of direct questions, but I am curious, editors in the house, how are you experiencing questions around AI and protecting authors and their work?
Here, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know within our group, we have been pretty explicit that authors cannot use AI to help them with their writing in any way for us to be able, if we're going to publish it. That's also true. I know on the illustrative side, that's not. And also, there was also wasn't recently somebody they wrote past, like they struck down some copyright because the copyright office basically said that you can't copyright AI either in some way. So it's not gonna. I mean, at the end of the day, we're creatives trying to obviously bring forth like original work and creative work, and I think AI kind of undermines that. And so I personally feel uncomfortable with the idea of knowing that something that I worked on was created by a computer and not by an actual person. I think on the question of copyright, I think I saw this also in the chat about someone being like, how do I copyright my work to make sure that like I didn't steal it, if this person didn't steal it, and whatever it is. Something that was interesting for me to learn when I was like getting into publishing is that like ideas are not copyrightable, only like actual work is. But also like, I think I also realized that there's not a whole lot there's nothing new under the sun in some ways, but but only you have your voice, right? And so I do think that what's new to the table every single time is your specific voice, your specific point of view, your specific lens in which you're seeing something. But like, romance, for instance, like people are going to fall in love at the end, happily ever after. You can't be like, they stole my idea, they fell in love. Like everybody's like, someone has to fall in love, right? Like there's just some things that are just part of life. As a kid's first day of school, every kid is going to have a first day of school. So like, that's not a story that you can be like, oh, they stole my idea. I think, so what, I think that's the least of your worries. I think the biggest thing about your worries, how do I authentically ultimately tell the story that has been placed on my heart? I think that's at the end of the day what it comes down to. Now, if you see that story that you have written down on paper being published somewhere else that you did not get permission to, then yes, that person has like violated your copyright and you should go after them. But other than that, it's really hard, I think, to I think it's not what you should stress out as much as like, am I telling the story authentically from my point of view that really honestly captures my voice? Because no one else can have your voice. You are the only one who has your voice. And I think that that's ultimately what I'm looking for, even when I look at works. So I do get submissions that are very similar. It is also the reason why I reject a lot of submissions, is because I feel like I read the same book about Christmas 20 times. Don't need another one. But this book about Christmas came from a new lens, a unique point of view, or the way they put together their words just shown up, like just jumped off the page in a way for me that I'm like, I need that Christmas book. And that's what I'm looking for in any of my submissions, is because there's a lot of ideas and stories that do repeat in my inbox over and over again. But the ones that I buy are the ones that feel highly unique, like the author really leaned into exactly the message they want to share in, just a way that only they could do.
That was fantastic for me. Thank you. I have two major questions that I'm hoping we can get to. And the first one is, how do you all answer this question? Because I know you get it. Someone comes up to you, knows who you are, knows what you do, and they say, oh my gosh, I have so many stories. People keep telling me I must write a book, but I have no idea where to start. How do I get started? How would each of you answer that?
I mean, you just got to sit down and start. There's no way out but through, if you're going to write a book. And I don't want to write a book for that reason. But if you're going to do it, you're going to really have to sit down at your computer or with your notebook or whatever it is and really spend the time on it.
I agree. I often say too, like, join a writing group, get into a short story workshop or memoir class, like whatever you're looking to write. Depending on where you are, there are likely organizations around that have writing classes or that have workshop groups, or, there's enough of you here on this chat that, we're going to connect and we're going to be accountability partners for each other and show 20 pages a month. I think that is needed because writing is such an insular endeavor that, like, you need someone else saying, did you write this week? Can I see some pages? And also just accountability, and sometimes just the knowledge that you may not have. Like, maybe you decide, I'm going to get a good 100 pages and I'm going to go join a fiction workshop or whatnot to help move it along. But I think that there's something about writing in community for sure, and having accountability that helps you move the project along. Sometimes I just say, like, you want to write a memoir, break down your life in like every 5 or 10 years. What was the biggest lessons? It's at the book. And like, what do you have here to say? And what are you saying that's new, fresh, and like substantial enough? But that's normally my advice to start.
I was going to just say what my shirt says, read. Read a lot. I think you should read the books you want to write, and also read the books that you don't want to write, right? Just kind of see what's out there in the world. For me, like, as a children's book editor, I think actually one of my biggest pet peeves is when an author is like, I want to write for kids, and you ask them, what have you read recently? Or like, what's your favorite picture? We're like, oh, I don't know. They don't have any. They can't list a single one. Or the one they have is the one they read to their kids 20 years ago. And I'm like, of course, everybody's read Goodnight Moon. I don't, like, whatever. Like, I'm curious that I want to know that you actually know what's going on in the world today, what you actually have read, what kids are loving today. But I also think, going back to both what Essie and Chelsea have said, it's part of actually just getting yourself to start writing, right? Like when you start seeing how when you're excited about what you're reading, sometimes it might inspire you in new ways. You might also just start learning, like, this is the way to like build up tension. This is the way to, create a plot twist. This is the way to like use dialogue in a way that's not dragging. And so the more you read, you even identify what you love in writing. And then that's an opportunity for you to try to, push yourself to like do more of what you love. And so I always say good readers also make good writers, is my opinion.
I would also say for nonfiction in particular, don't be afraid to start small and share those smaller works publicly in some way, whether that's pitching publications or maybe it's even sharing on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. I have multiple authors who've gone on to write well-regarded memoirs that started by sharing their work on Instagram. And so just think creatively about how you want to both be in that regular rhythm of writing and then also share it with the world, because that's kind of how you build that community of people who are following you, whether it's, editors at publications who you would want to cover the book later on, or a community of people who are just following you regularly and might come back around to the book.
Yeah, I would add, it's actually not a bad way to get agents either. You write like short fiction, submit to like lit mags. If you want to write nonfiction or memoir, write personal essays or short pieces and place them. You can start with small outlets at first and just start like getting into that habit and learning how to have a relationship with an editor. Like all of those things are going to be helpful. Yeah, and kind of like building up your confidence to write a book.
Thank you, Emmy. Sydney?
Yeah, I'll say reading is what comes to mind first, and then also that we hear a lot about like trying to network. Sorry, there's some stuff behind me. Trying to network like vertically, but I think building kind of a group of accountability partners that we already see happening in the chat is super important, because these are the folks that are going to cheer you on through your career, and that hopefully you'll be publishing with, so that you all can support one another throughout your publishing journey.
I love that. Thank you, Sydney. I have, I guess, one final question that Boomi, thank you, your t-shirt is helping to facilitate, and Sydney, you just nodded to. What are one or two recent books that someone should read to understand what is working today in your particular areas of expertise?
Since you called on me already, and I have visual aids, but this is actually one of my favorite books right now, Big by Vashti Harrison, and it actually just also was announced as a finalist for the National Book Award in Young People's Literature, which I hope it wins, honestly, I won't lie. But this picture book is gorgeous, and it's, stems from her own personal experience as, a kid who was big, who was cute as a baby, but then suddenly is not cute when she's 3 or 4 as big, and just like the idea of body positivity, but also even addressing some of just the bullying that comes from both adults and children around body size. And I think she handles it in such a beautiful way. It's not too heavy-handed. It's, pretty simple text, also beautiful illustrations, but she does self-illustrate. She illustrates her own work. So she does great work. But I think for me, there's a lot of times that adults have messages for children and they are so heavy-handed with it. And this is an example to give a book that communicates its message with so much simplicity, so much beauty, but also so much impact. Like even as an adult, and I actually was not a big kid, I was always actually made fun of for being too thin. I cried reading this book and felt like even just a moment of feeling seen and being like, I wish that like I felt affirmed and not had to feel like worried about my size ever, because, and that's what this book does. So Big by Vashti Harrison is mine.
Chelsea?
Can't tell if you said my name or not, but I'm gonna hop in. Okay, great. I think about 2 novels. One, shamelessly, is my own, but a book called Narrated on the Park by Clavis Natera. I often say like the things I look for as an editor are agency, intellect, and heart. And to me, agency is books that kind of do a little bit of work in the world. And so, like I said, it holds some kind of like shared wisdom and heart. It's just like a heart-rendering, emotionally like grabbing story. Also want sexy and fun too. And I think that Nerlin Park had all of the above. And I also think about Memphis by Tara Stringfellow, like just a good multi-generational family story. And so I think both of those, to me, novel-wise, just hold up really, really well. And things that are great reads.
Thank you, Chelsea. Derek?
I'm going to also be shameless to mention an author that I work with. She's on my mind because we just announced her second book. But Cole Arthur Riley, author of This Year Flesh, she, I think, is an interesting case study for a lot of what we were talking about with the platform, because she began this project called Black Liturgies 3 years ago in the summer of 2020, just looking for a more grounded, inclusive spirituality. She was going to an Episcopal church in the middle of everything happening that summer, and just realizing there's days where it's hard to pray prayers written by white men. So she kind of reimagined this project where like the words of James Baldwin could live next to deep prayer, breath meditations. And her second book is rooted in that project. But she began with this beautiful multi-generational memoir about inheriting this very grounded spirituality despite growing up in a family that wasn't religious. And she wrote about her father and her grandmother primarily. But I just think it's a beautiful, for religious nonfiction, example of writing about faith and these very like subjective experiences in a way that feels like embodied and tactile. And it's the kind of writing that I just think really feels alive in the space that I'm working in. And yeah, Cole's second book's coming out next spring. So very excited about that one.
I am too. I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't wait. Emmy?
I too will make a shameless plug. Because I think that might be useful for people who feel like their writing is across a bunch of genres and they're very stressed about picking a category. So Ijeoma Oluo's Mediocre is the subtitle, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America. It's about whiteness and maleness and Americanness from a Black woman's perspective. And it's brilliant and everyone should read it anyway. What I like about it is that it kind of blends memoir with history, with like journalism and cultural criticism. It has a lot of, it kind of crosses a lot of different categories, and it will do that across different chapters. Like it's not like a set one way or another category in any of the chapters. And I think she blends them really well in a way that builds like a larger argument of the big idea book, but also she can be funny, she can be kind of searing and sharp, she can be devastating, but she can work in all those different registers to get her larger points across. And I think for any writer who feels like it's kind of a blend of different categories, like I think that's something that I think about giving yourself the freedom to do what's right for the kind of book that you're writing. So that's my recommendation. Ijeoma Oluo, and the book is Mediocre.
Essie?
Yeah, I won't make a shameless plug, but that's only because none of my new projects are out yet. I will say commercial fiction, genre fiction definitely sort of rides trends. We don't necessarily try to make them happen, but we do try to be very on top of what's happening. And so right now we are seeing a genre blend of romance and fantasy, which we are calling romantasy. And if you want to write in that, I would recommend reading Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which I mean, everybody in romance and fantasy publishing has definitely read. So it's just good to be familiar with it if you are going to be writing something. But I mean, the basic premise is it's school for dragon riders training, and she was never meant to be trained to ride dragons and is put in this position. So there's like the survival, there's love interest, maybe there's another love interest, there's political intrigue. So sort of all the great world building that you get from fantasy novels, and then relationships at the center, which you get with romance novels. And I would say the thing about Fourth Wing is that it both blends those really well together. But I think also for romance readers who didn't read fantasy, it is a very good way into fantasy. And for fantasy readers who didn't read romance, it is a very good way to read romance. So on the publishing side, we love it because now it's like new audiences. And for the readers, it's nice because there's something fresh and new. And so if you're interested in writing anything that's, you know, sort of a commercial genre blend, I would definitely recommend this book as sort of an example of what you can do.
Thank you, Essie. I realized this, I hate it when this happens, but it is already our time to say goodbye.
Sydney has to go. Wait, Sydney has to share hers.
Sydney, your book.
Thanks, Rumi. I'll go quick. So the first is a historical picture book called You Gotta Meet Mr. Pierce. It is an engaging example of historical fiction about a Black artist and a man who owned a barbershop, and that was a community hub for many years in Ohio. And then also Joy Takes Root by Gwendolyn Wallace is an intergenerational story about a Black grandmother teaching her granddaughter holistic ways to heal.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Boomy. And thank you for what you just threw in the chat, Boomy. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you all. Incredible job. You are absolute rock stars yourself. So I can't wait to read some of your books because I feel like the information that you have is so valuable that we would love to pick it up on a shelf in Amazon or something. So maybe there's some awesome collaboration here just waiting to happen between the panelists. I just want to say to all of the participants tonight, thank you all so much as usual for your energy. Everybody, please go to the website. By tomorrow morning, you all will be able to watch the replay from tonight. We will also make notes available from tonight. The author roll call is available on the website. You all can find us on Instagram at Women in Words 2023. All of the different things that you all are requesting as it relates to networking and accountability groups, we're going to create all of those things for you. And so just give us a couple of days and you'll see these things be developed, but we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you, Portia, again, for being a fantastic moderator. Everybody have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.